Hi friend, and welcome back to Marvelous Friends, your home for all things Marvel Cinematic Universe and beyond. I'm Rhett, and today I'm discussing a few things you may not know are Marvel. Make sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and let's roll that credit. Marvel is home to so many popular characters, such as Captain America, Iron Man, the X-Men, and of course, our friendly neighborhood's Spider-Man. And through the MCU, we have been introduced to some characters we may not know as much about, such as the Guardians of the Galaxy, and there's a bunch more characters in Marvel Comics. What people may not realize, though, is that there are a lot of characters that aren't necessarily MCU or are MCU related that Marvel owns the rights to, that have been featured in film and television. And that's what I want to talk about today, is 5 Marvel properties you may not know are Marvel. So let's get started with number 5. Number 5, Star Wars. Now this one is a technicality, and though we will never see a Star Wars Marvel Universe crossover, or at least I hope not, I wouldn't put it past them to throw in some standard Star Wars aliens in the background of a Guardians film. That would be actually a really fun reference, especially since they kind of can do that. What I mean by this is through the connections that Marvel Studios has with Disney, and therefore Marvel Comics has with Disney, it is Marvel Comics' job to create the Star Wars comic books. Now, if you are a frequenter of your local comic book store or a big Star Wars buff, you probably already know this, but Marvel Comics produces a wide line of different comic books focusing on the world that the Star Wars films take place in. Now, there is a lot of debate here on the canon of Star Wars, and especially when you start factoring in the massive library of novels that take place in the Star Wars world. There's a lot of, is this canon, is this not canon, and overlap and different versions of the stories because of all this. But it is a fact that Marvel does have a hand in the storytelling of the Star Wars universe. And if you haven't seen any of those comic books and you are a fan of the Star Wars films, I definitely suggest checking them out. They're really cool. There's some great stories in there, and they kind of fill in some of the blanks of what's going on between the movies and sometimes what's going on before. But again, it is up to debate on how canon all of that is, so take it with a grain of salt, and just enjoy the stories for what they are. Number 4, Blade. Now, of course, the 2019 San Diego Comic-Con announcement made this a lot more well-known, but I still do meet and talk to someone every once in a while that doesn't realize that Blade is part of Marvel Comics. And that announcement in 2019, we learned that Marvel Studios is working on a Blade franchise to join the MCU. But back in the 90s, we had a Blade trilogy, and that is based upon the Blade comic books. Now, of course, there weren't any other Marvel characters, and that's why probably a lot of people did not realize that that trilogy is based on Marvel Comics. But Blade has a lot to do with the MCU. He has crossovers with other popular characters like Spider-Man, and I look forward to seeing how they can interpret him into the MCU. Especially considering we know that Morbius is coming through Sony, which is of course a vampire-based character, but we don't really see that crossing over into the MCU as part of that whole separate but equal Sony and Marvel Studios contract. So I'll be interested to see what Blade looks like in the MCU, considering we don't have vampires yet, but I am very excited for what this can mean moving forward. Number 3, Big Hero 6. If you are a Disney and Pixar fan like I am, I'm sure you know the film Big Hero 6, but what you may not know is that this is based on a Marvel comic book series from 1998, a group of the same name, though the origins are a little bit different. In the comic books, Big Hero 6 is established by the government. It isn't just a random group of teenagers that come together to form the team. There's also slight differences in the characters themselves as well. For example, Baymax in the comics is not a big fluffy robotic marshmallow type robot. He is more beast-like and green. Also, Wasabi doesn't use lasers, he uses knives and swords, and Fred actually can transform into a Godzilla-like kaiju. It isn't just a mascot suit. And there's some other differences as well. However, there is some great tie-ins to the X-Men specifically in the comic book series. For example, one member that isn't featured in the film is Sunfire, who is a regular member of the X-Men. And sometimes villain of the X-Men, Silver Samurai, also is a part of the team in more of an anti-hero role in the comic book series. Plus, if there was any doubt that this is a Marvel franchise, you need only watch the post-credits scene of the film, which the post-credits scene itself is a staple of the superhero genre that Marvel Studios established when they first started with Iron Man. And that is when we see Stan Lee make a cameo appearance as Fred's father in the Big Hero 6 film. And it's not a Marvel property in the modern era if Stan Lee doesn't make a cameo. Number 2, Men in Black. Now this one is kind of a technicality because it is only a Marvel property because Marvel bought up smaller comic book publishing companies, which is something they've done a lot of over the years. Now, I will say though, I did not know that Men in Black was based upon a comic book until I did research for this video. Though it is understandable because it was a very short comic book run. At the same time though, so much in our pop culture today is based in comic books and graphic novels, nothing should surprise me to have origins in the publishing genre. All that aside, a little history on the publication. The original story was published in 1990 by ACL Comics. I hope I pronounced that comic book company properly. They only had a 3-issue run with this, and then in 1992 the company was bought by Malibu Comic Books. They primarily bought the company because of the Men in Black franchise and its popularity, so they immediately ordered another 3-issue run of the series. Later in 1994, the Malibu comic book company was bought by Marvel, and that's what brings the property there. Shortly after that purchase, Marvel did sell the film rights to Sony, and the film franchise we know today launched in 1997. Now, in coalition with the film, Marvel wanted to capitalize on its popularity, so they did re-release the 2 series of 3 issues and did a series of one-shot comics that were based upon the story and characters in the film. So there is a little bit of original Marvel comic book content to the franchise, which is more than some of the other properties that are now Marvel due to the same buying up process. So I definitely wanted to include this one on the list. Number 1, Transformers. This was such a cool one to come across and learn about as I was doing research for the video, so I hope you find it as interesting as I did. So basically in the 1980s, Hasbro was launching a new toy line. It was based upon a similar toy from Japan of robots that turned into vehicles. But to make it more interesting for the US audience, they wanted to give each of the robots a persona, an idea that they had used previously with the G.I. Joe toys and saw that the G.I. Joes were much more popular with their individual characters than generic soldier toys on the market. So the group at Hasbro turned to Shooter and O'Neill at Marvel Comics, who developed the initial story for the robots and gave the iconic name to Optimus Prime, leader of the Autobots. The rest of the story and characters were fleshed out by a writer named Blonsky, who wrote a 4-issue run for the initial series. But those 4 issues were so popular that the story quickly extended to a total of 75 issues by the end of its run, and in UK actually received several additional runs on top of that. Now this was in Marvel Comics. It wasn't an offshoot story that was independent, as many of the favorite Marvel characters were crossing over into the story of the Transformers to kind of help sell it and make it more exciting for the US audience. That included cameos such as Spider-Man. But I don't suspect we'll see this happening anytime in the MCU, so don't get your hopes up or be disappointed. I'm not sure, depending on how you would feel about that. Let me know down in the comments. Now, I really thought this was interesting, as well as everything else on this list. I would love to know what you all thought, though. What did you not know was Marvel related, or did you know everything on this list? And also, if there's anything else that you know that's Marvel that many people don't around you, let me know down in those comments. There are a lot of other properties that I came across and doing this research for this video, so I probably will do another video on this topic later on down the road, and who knows, maybe some of your little bits and pieces of knowledge will find its way into that video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, please give it a like, and of course subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Liking and subscribing are such a big help to the channel, and I greatly appreciate it. Until next time though, I hope you are all having a marvelous rest of your day. Bye friends!